Act, H.R. 2548, asking unanimous consent to discharge Subcommittee Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management from further consideration of H.R. 2548, and that it be considered as read and open to amendment at any point without objection. So ordered. An amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Representative Fletcher was filed. Does Representative Fletcher wish to offer amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
This amendment was circulated in advance. Copies of the amendment are in member packets. The clerk will now designate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2548, offered by Ms. Fletcher, 010.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of substitute shall be considered as read. The amendment in the nature of substitute shall be considered base text for purposes of amendment. Representative Fletcher now recognized for 5 minutes to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment offers technical and confirming changes to my bill, H.R. 2548, the Hazard Eligibility and Local Projects, or HELP Act. Under Section 404 of the Stafford Act, FEMA provides up to 75% of funds for cost-effective mitigation projects through Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. Local municipalities, states, and tribes are responsible for meeting the remaining 25% match. As members of this committee will recall, Hurricane Harvey hit Houston and the Gulf Coast in August of 2017, causing an estimated $125 billion in damages. And nearly 2 years later, as we're now entering the 2019 storm season, people in Houston and along the Gulf Coast have seen little progress in the commencement of mitigation projects that are clearly needed. My constituents have told me that they are afraid another rainstorm will come and that their homes will flood again. Local leaders, including the City of Houston and Harris County, have identified the risk of losing federal FEMA matching funds as a deterrent to starting certain mitigation projects for flooding in our area. People in my district and across the country are frustrated and confused by the glacial pace that mitigation projects can and often do take. And that's why I introduced this bill. When states or municipalities apply through the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, projects, regardless of size or scope, require a comprehensive review to make sure all requirements of the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, or other statutory requirements are met. In many cases, like in the Houston area, local municipalities want to move quickly after a natural disaster on projects like land acquisition for water detention and other small mitigation efforts that can have a tremendous impact. The one-size-fits-all approach to reviewing projects through the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program needlessly delays this mitigation work. That's why I've introduced the HELP Act, which will allow land acquisition projects and simple construction projects that do not require an environmental impact statement under NEPA to commence immediately without the risk of losing potential federal matching funds, which is essential for these projects. I would particularly like to thank my co-sponsor, Mr. Meadows, for working with me on this bill. Disaster mitigation is not a partisan issue. I'm glad to work together to address government inefficiencies where they exist. This is one that is deeply impacting my community, and I appreciate consideration of this bill. There is still much work to be done to prepare for the next storm, but I'm hopeful that the HELP Act will make it possible for local municipalities and states to receive project approval in a more efficient manner. I'd like to thank the chairman and committee staff for working with my office in developing this legislation. I urge my colleagues to support this important legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentlelady. I'd like to yield myself such time as I may consume to speak in favor of her legislation and the amendment. She has been a very persistent advocate in pointing out the problems with this program and the potential for yet another disaster unless some of these steps are implemented before the next severe storm. The Hazard Mitigation Grant Program started in 1989. We've obligated more than $5.2 billion to projects, but $1 billion have been unobligated, not spent, and they were returned to FEMA. Not that the need wasn't there or her constituents had a need. They have proposals that are very meritorious, but the burdensome review process just stymied all their best efforts. These projects are all categorically exempt from NEPA review, as you pointed out. This does not cause any issues regarding NEPA. It just really clears red tape and bureaucracy out of the way so that these projects can go forward as intended with merit. So with that, I'd see if any other members have remarks. Representative Colon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank in command Congresswoman Fletcher, because we are facing the same situations in the territories as well. And once FEMA or the federal agencies allocate the funds, they give a short time to make it happen. And actually, we are in the brink of losing a lot of that amount of money in September of this year. So this will expedite and clear the path to make things happen. So with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Representative Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the gentlelady from Texas for offering this bill. Look, the federal government often re-victimizes our disaster victims because of the inability to act quickly. A hazard mitigation program is just one example, and I certainly do appreciate her addressing some of the rifle shot problems with the program. It certainly needs to happen. We have got to continue spending time focusing on how we can improve government preparedness, government response, and government recovery to these disasters. We end up spending way too much money. We take way too much time. Mr. Chairman, I also want to highlight that in the Bipartisan Budget Act last year, we provided, I want to say it was $16 billion. I need to go back and look at the figure, through the Department of Housing and Urban Development for flood mitigation, which is the jurisdiction, that program or that objective is under the jurisdiction of this committee. Obviously, being under HUD, it went under the Appropriations Committee and the Financial Services Committee. HUD hasn't even written the rules, on how this money is going to be spent. It was appropriated in February of 18. Further challenging our community's ability to recover, because if they don't have safety and security, knowing that their communities are going to be safer from floods, protected from floods, people aren't going to want to invest their flood insurance checks and other things back in this community. So that's a problem. This is a problem that the gentlelady from Texas is addressing. But lastly, my friend from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett, and I introduced H.R. 1311 that passed unanimously out of this committee that addresses some of the long-term recovery issues as well. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope as we move forward, that bill also stays on the front burner. We're actually able to move it through the House floor. I know we have Congressman Cohen, Congresswoman Gonzalez-Colon, and other bipartisan co-sponsors out of this committee, and I hope we're able to continue to keep this on the front burner as a focus for this committee and ensure we improve the resiliency of our communities and improve government efficiency in recovering from these awful disasters. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to be recognized? Representative Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to commend Representative Fletcher for bringing forth this bill. Those of us in California have had more than enough disasters, and this issue addresses a very well-known and unfortunate problem in our state of trying to use this hazard mitigation money early on to prepare ahead of the next storm or the next fire or the next earthquake, as the case might be. It's a very important element in protecting our communities, and Ms. Fletcher, thank you very much for bringing it forward and for the committee moving this legislation along.
Okay. Thank the gentleman. Other members wish to be recognized? Seeing none, then we'll consider the bill for amendment. Are there amendments to the amendment in the nature of substitute? Hearing none. The question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye.